Shabbat Shalom again. In the past few months, especially in the days returning from my honeymoon, I spent a great deal of time thinking about what it means to be strong. Is strength the ability to stand firm in the face of adversity? Is strength being true to oneself and taking pride in oneself, one's work, one's family, even when it looks a bit different? Is it persisting through a journey of tremendous emotional and physical challenge for over a year, maybe years, in hopes of providing not just a better life for one's family, but a life safe from persecution? Is strength being curious and open to the ideas of others, feeling secure enough to love and let others in? Or is strength actually being closed off, a safe, being steadfast and committed to something and never wavering? Our Torah and our sages really explore what strength is. And in Parshat Vayera, our Torah portion this week, we read about God's plan to harden Pharaoh's heart. And I will harden Pharaoh's heart, God says, so that I may multiply my signs and marvels in the land of Egypt. But for the first 5 plagues, blood, frogs, lice, wild animals, and pestilence of livestock, our Torah tells us, and Pharaoh hardened his own heart. For some, this may seem like quite a stance of strength. For the first 5 rounds of plagues, Pharaoh did not give in. That's a strong man. And actually, the text, at least on the surface, supports this claim. We read, Vayechazak leiv paro velo shilach et bnei Yisrael. And Pharaoh hardened his heart, and God hardened Pharaoh's heart so that he did not let the Israelites go. If we look closer at this word that is translated as hardened into English, we'll see that it doesn't quite mean that. It actually, yechazek, comes from the word chazak, which we know, right? Chazak, chazak, v'nit chazek. It means strength. 15th century Italian commentator Sforno bolsters this reading. He argues against the predominant understanding held by most of our commentators that God hardening Pharaoh's heart did not remove Pharaoh's agency. Rather, it restored it. After 5 plagues, the Egyptian people had lost their source of water for their crops. Their livestock were ravaged by fleas and ticks, unable to work the fields. Piles of frog carcasses heaped inside and outside of their homes and stunk as they rotted in the sun. And all were uncomfortable as lice crowded their scalps. Kind of disgusting. Over and over again, they cried out to Pharaoh to free the Israelite slaves. Throughout each of these 5 plagues, Pharaoh stood strong, unyielding to his people's cries. Why should the 6th plague be any different? Sforno continues that if God had not strengthened Pharaoh's heart, Pharaoh would have collapsed much sooner and sent the Israelites on their way, even though that was not what he wanted to do. For Pharaoh, strength was putting himself and his own ego over those who wailed outside of the palace. This is one version of strength. But in Rabbi Blake's words, it is not a very Jewish version. Our sages cannot even help themselves. They can't leave the discussion there. So they say, who is strong? Ezehu gibor, they ask in Pirkei Avot. And this is already a more interesting question. It's already a more interesting word than chazak. No longer are we speaking about a kind of physical strength or even a kind of mental strength born of stubbornness. Gibor means strength, but it also means hero, a person who overcomes. Just by choosing this different word, gibor, the sages are not just asking who is strong, but they're asking who is a hero, who knows how to overcome adversity, who can be a true leader. The sages, as they are wont to do, come up with their own answer, of course. Ezehu gibor, who is strong, they ask. Ha-kovesh et yitzro, a person who conquers, ha-kovesh, et yitzro, themselves. What does this mean, to conquer oneself, this yitzro? These are our base impulses, the yitzro, yetzer. They are what cause us, in times of argument, to dig in our heels and push others away out of spite, pettiness, ego, or our inability to admit that we are wrong. And this happens to all of us, including me. We all experience this moment of, oh, I know that I'm right and I just want to stick to that. But how do we make sure that we conquer ourselves and our base impulses do not conquer us? The Talmud puts it like this. Rava said, at first, the evil impulse, this yetzer, is called a wayfarer, meaning it comes and it goes every once in a while and it's fleeting. But then, if you continue to feel that way in the same situation, then it's called a guest, meaning that it really sticks around. It stays with you for a day, maybe two, maybe even a week, but not quite forever. Then finally, Rava says, the yetzer, this evil impulse, this base instinct, becomes a master. This was Pharaoh's plight. At first, he gave into his yetzer, or even welcomed it, believing that true strength was only achieved by weakening others. This flawed understanding of strength eventually led not only to his own downfall, but the death of his firstborn son and the collapse of his society's economic system based in slave labor. He could have avoided this failure of leadership by simply listening to the cries of his own people, those who lacked power and were completely vulnerable in the face of God's plagues. But he confused openness and sensitivity to their needs with acting weak. However, giving his vulnerable people agency and freeing the most vulnerable of all, the Israelite slaves, would have been the definition of gibor. It is only one who conquers their impulses, conquers their impulse toward their ego, who elevates themselves above their most based instincts and reaches for the moral high ground, and dare I say it, a sense of holiness that can become a gibor. After all, we just read it, right? Ata gibor leolam Adonai. In this givurot, gibor, same root. We say somech noflim. We say matir asurim. Somech noflim being God, you're the one who picks up the downtrodden. You're the one who frees the captives. I know that we already read it, but these words don't just call upon God to act in a certain way in our world, but they call upon us to act in a certain way in God's world. Being a gibor, being strong, being a hero, being a true leader, someone who overcomes, is not hardening our hearts to those who are most marginalized. It is instead knowing that we must not give into this impulse to grow callous, lest that callousness become our masters. Real strength is about cultivating an openness and willingness to hear the cries of the most vulnerable, even when it's a little uncomfortable, and it is often uncomfortable. But that is the Jewish way. Shabbat shalom.